The soft patter of rain fell over the quiet cemetery, the skies gray with impending dusk. Among the neatly lined headstones, a lone dog stood guard. Its coat, slick from the rain, glistened under the muted light. The animal's posture was unwavering, its head bowed slightly as if mourning. For 3 days, the dog had remained by a single grave, refusing food, shelter, or coaxing from passers-by. Martha, a widowed retiree who often walked through the cemetery for solace, had first noticed the dog on her routine visit. She'd tried to approach with a gentle voice and a piece of bread, but the animal had remained fixed, a quiet growl signaling its desire to be left alone. Curious but respectful, she had alerted the groundskeeper, Tom, a man who had worked at the cemetery for decades. Together, they observed the dog from a distance, unsure of what to make of its behavior. "It's not just grief," Martha remarked softly as the rain dripped from her umbrella. "There's something it's protecting." Tom, a stout man with a weathered face, nodded grimly. "In all my years here, I've never seen anything like it. Dogs don't stay this long unless they have a reason." That afternoon, as the rain intensified, the dog's stance shifted. It began pawing at the ground near the grave, its movements frantic yet deliberate. Tom's brow furrowed, a sense of unease creeping over him. "It's digging," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Why would it be digging?" Martha felt a chill despite the warm coat she wore. "We should call someone," she suggested. "The police, maybe? What if there's something's wrong?" Tom hesitated, but finally nodded. Better safe than sorry. By the time the police arrived, the dog had stopped digging, but remained by the disturbed earth, its eyes fixed on the grave as if willing it to reveal its secrets. Officer Daniels, a young man with a calm demeanor, approached cautiously. He knelt a short distance away, his voice gentle. "What are you trying to show us, boy?" The dog didn't respond, but its unyielding posture spoke volumes. Daniels exchanged a look with his partner, Officer Harris, a seasoned investigator with a skeptical nature. "It's probably nothing," Harris muttered. "Dogs do strange things." "Maybe," Daniels replied, "but it feels different." Under the watchful gaze of the dog, the officers began a preliminary inspection. The grave, marked with an unassuming headstone, belonged to a man named Albert Green, who had passed away nearly a decade earlier. There was nothing outwardly suspicious, no signs of tampering, no recent disturbances. But the dog's behavior was impossible to ignore. As the rain began to let up, Daniels made a decision. "We'll need to open it," he said, his tone resolute. Harris frowned but didn't argue. "Better rule out anything unusual," Daniels added. Martha and Tom, standing a respectful distance away, exchanged worried glances. "What do you think they'll find?" Martha whispered. Tom shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know," he admitted. "But that dog knows something we don't." The officers called for assistance, and as a small team began preparations to exhume the grave, the dog remained vigilant. It sat now, its posture calm but its eyes sharp, following every movement. For those watching, the animal's presence felt almost sacred, as though it were a guardian of the truth buried beneath the earth. Martha couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was more than a mere animal. Its unwavering determination, its refusal to leave despite the rain and cold. It was as if it carried a purpose beyond comprehension. "It's not just a dog," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "It's a witness." As the first shovel broke the earth, the dog let out a low, mournful howl that sent shivers through everyone present. It was a sound filled with sorrow and warning, a haunting echo that hung in the air long after the rain had stopped. The officers paused, their hands gripping their tools tightly. Daniels glanced at the dog, his face pale. "Whatever's down there," he said quietly, "we're about to find out." The soft rustle of shovels breaking the damp earth was the only sound in the cemetery, apart from the occasional sigh of the wind. The small crowd of onlookers, Martha, Tom, and a handful of curious villagers who had arrived after hearing the commotion, stood at a respectful distance, their eyes fixed on the grave. Officer Daniels worked steadily alongside the cemetery workers, his nerves barely contained. Each scoop of soil brought them closer to whatever truth the dog had been guarding. Harris stood nearby, his skeptical expression replaced with one of quiet unease. Despite his years on the force, something about the situation felt off. The dog hadn't moved, its posture rigid and its gaze unwavering. It sat like a sentinel, its body soaked from the rain but seemingly oblivious to the cold. As the workers reached the top of the casket, Daniels called for a pause. He wiped his brow, his gloves smeared with mud, and took a deep breath. "Let's open it carefully," he said. The casket's exterior was surprisingly well preserved, given the years it had spent underground. Its dark wood was slick with moisture, and the brass fittings glinted faintly in the dim light. With a nod from Daniels, the workers pried it open, the lid creaking as it gave way. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as the interior was revealed. The casket was not empty, as some had feared, but its contents were far from ordinary. Instead of the expected remains of Albert Green, the casket held a jumble of items that seemed both random and unsettling. A stack of old photographs, a tattered notebook, and a small rusted lockbox. Daniels frowned, reaching for the notebook first. The pages were damp but intact, filled with handwritten notes and an uneven scrawl. The entries were fragmented, detailing vague references to hidden sins and keeping them safe. One line, scrawled repeatedly across several pages, sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "The Guardian will not leave until the truth is known." "What does it mean?" Harris asked, his voice low, as he leaned in to examine the pages. Daniels shook his head. "I'm not sure, but it's clear this isn't just a routine burial." Meanwhile, Margaret's attention shifted to the photographs. She held one up, her hand trembling slightly as she examined the faded image. It depicted a group of people standing in front of the very cemetery they were in. At the edge of the photo, almost blending into the background, stood a dog, eerily similar to the one now watching over the grave. "This can't be," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "How could it be the same dog?" The onlookers murmured among themselves, their curiosity now mingled with fear. Tom, who had seen his fair share of strange occurrences as a cemetery groundskeeper, crossed himself, his eyes fixed on the dog. "That animal's no ordinary creature," he whispered to Martha. "It's here for a reason." Before anyone could respond, the dog let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing as it stared at the lockbox. Daniels noticed the reaction and hesitated before reaching for the box. It was heavy, its rusted surface cold to the touch. With a careful motion, he pried it open, revealing its contents. Inside were small, peculiar objects, a rusted key, a string of rosary beads, and a faded letter sealed with wax. Daniels removed the letter carefully, breaking the brittle seal. He unfolded the paper, the ink smudged but still legible. The letter began with an ominous line. "To whomever finds this, know that the past cannot be buried forever." As Daniels read aloud, the dog stood, its body tense and its eyes locked on the grave. The letter spoke of a secret buried not just in the grave, but within the very fabric of the town's history. It referenced a betrayal, a tragedy, and an unfulfilled promise. "The Guardian will remain until the debt is paid," the letter concluded, sending shivers through everyone present. Harris, typically dismissive of anything remotely superstitious, looked visibly shaken. "What kind of debt?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Daniels didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the dog, which now stood directly beside the grave, its presence more commanding than ever. "I don't know," Daniels said finally. "But whatever it is, this dog seems to know more than we do." The cemetery was shrouded in an eerie silence as Officer Daniels held the letter, its cryptic words resonating in his mind. The crowd of onlookers stood transfixed, their earlier whispers now replaced by an anxious stillness. The dog, its gaze sharp and intense, moved closer to the grave, as though urging them to continue. "Something's not right here," Margaret said quietly, her voice trembling. She clutched the photograph she had found, the image of the cemetery and the dog haunting her thoughts. "That dog? It's like it's been here before." Daniels nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the rusted key inside the lockbox. "The letter talks about a debt, about secrets that couldn't stay buried. Maybe this key is the next piece of the puzzle." Harris, though skeptical, had lost much of his earlier dismissiveness. "If this is connected to the town's history, we need to find out what it's hiding," he said. "But why would a dog?" He trailed off, shaking his head, as though unable to finish the thought. Daniels turned to the dog, kneeling down to meet its eyes. "What are you trying to show us?" he asked softly. The dog didn't respond, of course, but its body language was unmistakable. It wanted them to follow. Margaret stepped forward, holding the photograph up for Daniels and Harris to see. "Look at this," she said. "This picture is decades old, but the dog in it, doesn't it look just like this one?" Harris frowned, leaning in to examine the image. "It's impossible," he muttered, "but I can't deny it. It's almost identical." Daniels stood, the key in his hand. "If this dog has been here before, then it's not here by chance. Let's see if this key leads us to more answers." The group turned their attention back to the grave, their unease growing as they realized the lockbox was only part of the mystery. Daniels carefully inspected the casket's interior, feeling along the wooden panels for any hidden compartments. After a few moments, his fingers caught on something, a small indentation in the side. He inserted the key, twisting it gently. A faint click echoed through the air as a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a second, smaller box. Unlike the first, this one was ornately decorated, its surface engraved with symbols of protection and eternity. Daniels opened it cautiously, revealing a bundle of yellowed letters and an old leather journal. The letters were addressed to Albert Green, the name on the headstone, but the handwriting suggested they were written by multiple people. Daniels skimmed through the first few pages, his heart racing as he read. The letters spoke of guilt, of betrayal, and of a pact made in desperation. The journal, meanwhile, contained cryptic entries that detailed the events leading up to Green's death. "There's a pattern here," Daniels said, his voice tight. "These letters talk about something Green was involved in, something dangerous. And this journal, it mentions the Guardian multiple times." Margaret leaned closer, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "What does it say?" Daniels flipped to a page marked with an ink stain. "The Guardian watches over the forgotten," he read aloud. "It will not rest until the truth is brought to light." Harris glanced at the dog, a shiver running down his spine. "You're telling me this dog is the Guardian? That it's been waiting all these years for someone to uncover the truth?" Daniels didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the dog, whose eyes seemed to meet his with an almost human understanding. "Maybe it's not just about the dog," he said finally. Maybe it's about what it represents, a promise, a duty, something bigger than any of us. The rain began to pick up again, a steady drizzle that soaked through their clothing but did little to dampen their resolve. Daniels gathered the letters and journal carefully, ensuring they wouldn't be damaged by the rain. "We need to take this back to the station," he said. "There's more to uncover, and I think these documents hold the answers." The dog let out a soft bark, breaking the tense silence. Margaret placed a gentle hand on its head, her fear replaced by a deep respect for the animal. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you?" she whispered. The dog responded with a slow wag of its tail, a quiet acknowledgement that sent a chill through her. As they prepared to leave, Daniels turned to the crowd of onlookers, his voice firm but calm. "This is more than just a mystery," he said. "It's a piece of our town's history that's been hidden for too long, and this dog, it's here for a reason. We owe it to the past and to ourselves to find out the truth." The crowd watched in silence as the group left the cemetery, the dog walking confidently by their side. The rain continued to fall, washing over the gravestones and the disturbed earth, as though cleansing the secrets buried beneath. Back at the station, the room was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. Daniels, Margaret, and Harris gathered around a desk piled with the journal, letters, and photographs recovered from the grave. Buddy, the steadfast dog, lay nearby, his watchful eyes never straying far from the table. The first letters Daniels had skimmed revealed only fragments of the story. Now, with time and focus, they began piecing together the full narrative. The letters, written in varying tones and handwriting, all referenced a shared guilt among a group of individuals connected to Albert Green. They spoke in cryptic terms about the pact and a debt that bound them together. "It sounds like they were trying to hide something," Harris said, his voice edged with tension. "But what, and why involve a dog in all of this?" Margaret held up one of the photographs, her finger pointing to the dog. "Maybe this dog, or its ancestor, was always part of it," she said. "Some kind of guardian, just like the journal says." Daniels opened the leather-bound journal, flipping carefully through its worn pages. The entries were detailed, recounting Green's life in the town. He had been a respected figure, deeply involved in the local church and community. But as Daniels read on, the tone of the entries shifted. Green's words became darker, filled with fear and regret. "It's here," Daniels said, pointing to an entry dated just days before Green's death. He read aloud. "We thought we could bury it, that the guardian would protect the secret, but it was never meant to be hidden. The debt will come due, and when it does, the guardian will reveal what we tried to forget." Margaret's brows knit together in thought. "The guardian? It must mean the dog, right? And if Green's journal is accurate, this dog, or its lineage, has been watching over that grave for years." Harris, though still skeptical, leaned in. What kind of secret would need that level of protection, and why would it come due now? Daniels flipped to another entry, his breath catching as he read, "The truth lies beneath the grave. To unearth it will set the town free, but it will also reveal our sins." He looked up, his voice steady but grave. "There's more buried in that cemetery than just Albert Green." Buddy stood suddenly, his ears perked as though he had sensed something. Margaret instinctively reached out to him, her hand brushing his sleek fur. "He knows," she whispered. "He's been leading us this whole time." The group exchanged glances, their unease mounting. Harris cleared his throat. "If the journal says there's more buried there, we need to go back. Whatever this secret is, it's been haunting this town, and that dog, for decades." The rain had let up by the time they returned to the cemetery, flashlights in hand. The grave of Albert Green stood before them, its disturbed earth still damp from earlier. Buddy moved with purpose, his nose to the ground as he began sniffing near the base of the headstone. Daniels knelt, running his hands along the grave's edges. "If there's something else here, it might not be deep," he said. "Let's dig carefully." The small group worked in tense silence, the only sounds the scrape of tools against soil and Buddy's occasional soft whines. After several minutes, Margaret's spade hit something solid. She froze, her heart pounding. "There's something here," she said, her voice trembling. Harris and Daniels joined her, carefully clearing away the soil to reveal a second, smaller box. Unlike the first, this one was plain and unadorned, its wood darkened with age. Daniels lifted it out with care, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on them all. He opened the box slowly, revealing a collection of items: a rusted knife, a faded photograph of several men standing in front of the church, and a handwritten confession. The confession was signed by multiple names, including Albert Green, and detailed a tragic incident from decades earlier. "They covered up a death," Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion as he scanned the page. "A worker fell during the church's construction. They hid the body, calling it an accident, but it wasn't. They were negligent and they knew it." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "They buried him without a proper grave," she whispered. "And the dog, the guardian, it's been waiting for someone to uncover the truth." Harris exhaled sharply, his earlier skepticism replaced by disbelief. This is why Green felt guilty, why he wrote about the dead. He knew it wasn't just his secret, it was the town's. The photograph in the box confirmed it. The faces of the men in the photo matched the names on the confession, their expressions solemn as they stood near the site of the incident. Buddy, now sitting beside the grave, let out a low whine, his eyes fixed on the group. Daniels stood, his face pale but resolute. "This has to be made public," he said. "The truth needs to come out for Green's sake, and for the worker who was forgotten." As the first rays of dawn broke over the cemetery, the group stood together in solemn reflection. The dog's unwavering presence, the uncovered secrets, and the weight of the past all converged in this single moment. Buddy, the guardian, had done his duty, ensuring that the truth was finally revealed. The rising sun bathed the cemetery in a soft golden light, chasing away the remnants of the storm. The unearthed box lay on the ground, its damning contents now fully revealed. The truth of the decades-old betrayal was undeniable, and the weight of it pressed heavily on everyone present. Buddy stood near the grave, his tail still, and his gaze fixed on Margaret. It was as if the dog knew his mission was nearly complete. Margaret knelt beside him, her voice soft as she whispered, "You've carried this for so long, haven't you? It's time for peace." Officer Daniels carefully gathered the confession and photograph, ensuring they were protected. "We'll take this to the town council," he said, his voice steady. "The community deserves to know what happened. It's time to honor the memory of the worker who was forgotten." Harris, who had been skeptical from the start, now looked at Buddy with a mix of awe and respect. "This dog has done something no one else could," he said. "It's like he knew the truth needed to come out." Margaret stroked Buddy's fur, her touch gentle. "He's not just a dog," she said. "He's a guardian sent to protect the memory of the lost." As the group prepared to leave, Buddy surprised everyone by stepping forward and letting out a low, mournful howl. The sound echoed through the cemetery, carrying a sense of release and finality. It was as if he was saying goodbye, not just to the grave, but to the weight of his duty. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she watched Buddy. "He's been waiting for this moment," she said, her voice breaking. and now he can finally rest. The cemetery felt lighter as they walked away, Buddy following close behind. His steps were slower now, his posture more relaxed. For the first time, it seemed, the dog was no longer burdened by the past. In the days that followed, the town learned of the uncovered truth. The worker's name, long forgotten, was brought to light, and a proper memorial was erected in his honor. The community came together to reflect on the past and to ensure that such a tragedy would never be hidden again. Buddy became a quiet hero, his role in the discovery celebrated by those who'd witnessed his determination. Margaret, unable to bear the thought of the dog being alone again, took him into her home. Though she often marveled at his intelligence and his almost uncanny awareness, she treated him with the simple kindness and love he had always deserved. On the first morning in Margaret's home, Buddy lay on the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon. He seemed at peace, his role as a guardian fulfilled. Margaret sat beside him, a cup of tea in her hands, and whispered, "You've done enough, Buddy. Rest now." Buddy rested his head on her lap, his eyes closing as the sun rose higher in the sky. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the dog, who had carried the secrets of the grave, finally found the peace he had so faithfully earned. If this story of loyalty, courage, and uncovering the truth moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's honor the extraordinary ways animals teach us about love and responsibility.